Okay, today we've got a very different format, modelled on BBC's Question Time. And when I put my dicky bow on this morning, I thought, oh, you look like a complete idiot with a dicky bow, but I thought, no, I'll go for it anyway. And I'm pleased I did, because I've had lots of nice comments. Thank you very much. And some of you are old enough. We're not on television now. Not yet. And some of you are of an age where you would remember the original presenter of Question Time, Robin Day. Of course, he was very stern, and he wore the dicky bow to make him even more stern. So I may have to be stern today if things get out of hand. We're mainly going to be talking, focusing about the conflict in Ukraine, but time permitting we may try to squeeze in a few other topics. Okay, so I'm going to just introduce this topic before I introduce our panellists today. So over the past couple of months, I'm sure that most of us have struggled to imagine the suffering that's going on in places like Mariupol. How on earth can people survive in bunkers with very little food, water, and medical supplies for weeks on end? And I suppose the grim truth is that thousands of people have not survived. And maybe, like me, you sometimes ask yourself, how can we just carry on with our own lives, knowing that such terrible things are going on in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world? But maybe that's the best thing that we can do, is to carry on with our lives and be grateful that we live in a place like Bournemouth, whilst not forgetting what is going on elsewhere. One of the first casualties of war, we are told, is the truth, and this may be for the very good reason that information and propaganda are part of the war effort on both sides. Clearly there are two competing narratives going on, the Russian narrative and the Ukrainian/Western narrative. Which one should we believe? Can we believe anything anymore? I think we can, but we should always be prepared to doubt what we believe. You may have formed some strong opinions about the war, and you may want to express them forcefully today, and we encourage you to do that. But I do also want to invite you to keep an open mind and listen to what others are saying. Any one of us may be mistaken, and we may need to revise our opinions. The brain is a wonderful thing, and it's continuously making sense of all of the information that's being fed into it. But the more information that's fed in, the more work the brain has to do to assimilate the new information and possibly change the modelling that it's doing about what's going on. So what I believe about the war today is actually different to what I believed 2 months ago. And in 2 months' time I may believe something different again. Not radically different, but over time the pattern in my own mind changes with new information. So, two competing narratives. One is that Putin is a monster in the same category as Adolf Hitler and has to be utterly defeated. The other is that Russia was justified in some way in invading Ukraine, perhaps for defensive reasons. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to tease out some of the complexities in these two competing narratives. And maybe we will reject both of them and come up with some intermediate position. Or we may all have our own slightly different views on what's going on. So I've provided a potted history of NATO and Ukraine on the handout. I did do 30, so I'm sorry if we haven't quite got enough to go around, but I hope most of you who've had a quick look at least at the handout. Now NATO has of course expanded over the last 30 years, and some people think that NATO should have disbanded when the Warsaw Pact disbanded. But the other side of this is that there seems to have been a very clear determination of the Ukrainian people to be independent of Russia and to become more aligned with the rest of Europe. The main events in the history are the Orange Revolution in 2004, when there was an uprising triggered by a contested election. It was called the Orange Revolution because all the protesters in Ukraine dressed in orange. I'm not sure why, but they did. And 10 years later, there was the so-called Maidan Revolution. It looks like the word maiden, but I believe it's pronounced as in the name of Maidan, which simply means square. So it's like the revolution in the square. And that was triggered by the decision of Yanukovych, President Yanukovych, not to sign an agreement with the European Union. And President Yanukovych fled Ukraine, and the Russo-Ukrainian War started shortly afterwards. So the war in Ukraine today has already been going on for 8 years. And it's become clear that Western countries like the United States and the United Kingdom have been providing military assistance to Ukraine and trade throughout that time. And you may agree or disagree with that. Okay, well look, that's enough of a preamble from me. I'm going to now introduce our panellists. First of all, Sergei Makulin. Sergei. He was born in the Soviet Union, and he tells me that he had a great childhood. He graduated from the Crimean State Agricultural University. He wrote a thesis on the transition of Ukrainian accountancy standards to international standards, and it was the first ever paper on this subject in Ukraine. He moved to the UK in 1999, and he qualified as a chartered certified accountant. He runs marathons, and he assists with junior park runs in Bournemouth. And Sergio, I believe you've recently done a marathon in Corfu. Yes, hence you're looking very tanned. Yeah.
That's an extra role.
Okay. We also have a panellist called Tama Madesi. Have I pronounced that correctly, Tama? Tama is also known as Sister Tama to some people. She was born in Ireland and raised as a Roman Catholic. As a child, she wanted to be a nun, but when the priest told her that she would be married to Christ and that this would preclude her having children, she had second thoughts. So she moved to the UK and discovered Islam. She married, and she has 5 daughters. Among her many roles and activities, she is one of the chaplains at Bournemouth University, and she does an incredible amount of relief work for refugees. Tama and I are part of the Bournemouth-based Many Faiths team that goes into local schools to inform students about our different beliefs. So Tama and I have known each other for a number of years already. We go back years, we do. Neil Grant, here's Neil, is well known to many of us as the convener of Café Philo, a philosophical discussion group which he founded in Madrid 15 years ago and which has been running in Bournemouth and Poole for many years. Neil is a Londoner by birth, but he spent 25 years living and working in France, Spain, Portugal and Germany, giving him an international outlook when it comes to world affairs. He directly witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and he made friends with victims of Stasi oppression. These events were instrumental in moulding his views of East-West relations. And Neil was a member of Dorset Humanist Committee quite a few years ago. Last but not least, Aaron Darkwood served in the Cold War Reserve Forces of the Territorial Army and the Royal Observer Corps, and he has a keen interest in military affairs and politics, both in the UK and globally. He was our Humanist of the Year in 2014, and he is a writer and design editor for Humanistically Speaking magazine. So will you please welcome all 4 members of our panel. So I'm going to kick off with questions to the panel. I did ask on Meetup if you had any questions to put forward today, to put them on Meetup, and we've had 2. So I'm not going to restrict you to 2. We will. I have made up some questions which I've shared with the panel, but that's really just to get us going. And I hope that as time goes on, you will indicate to me whether you want to make a comment or ask a supplementary question. Do please try to catch my eye, and we'll get to you with the mic. So one of the rules today is that no one is allowed to speak unless I'm pointing the mic at you. Okay? Is that a deal? Okay. Let's start off then with a question from Frank. And Frank is here, so Frank, if you're happy for me to read out your question. Frank says this: the Ukraine conflict is a manufactured proxy war started by the United States on Russia. How much longer can a quest for a peaceful world be pursued when such a violent, self-interested, psychopathic United States deep state uses NATO, the European Union and the UK as its agents to subjugate anyone in its path to world domination? Okay, so maybe to put that into a very brief idea, it was the United States what started it. So does the panel agree with this assessment? I'm going to ask Neil, first of all, to have a go at that. If Neil, if you're happy to have a go.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, working. Frank, get off the fence with this one. That's the first thing I'd say. Yeah. Okay, what do I think about the American input? I think that the first thing to say is I imagine that all of us wholeheartedly condemn the Russian actions and Putin and so on. I mean, that goes without saying, certainly for me. However, I do feel very strongly that the whole situation is a fundamental failure of diplomacy on the part and military action on the part of the West, and I think that has exacerbated the situation. I'm not suggesting that the Americans or anyone else have forced Putin into doing what he's doing, but I think the situation has arisen in large part because of action since the Second World War, when the West and NATO had ample opportunity to create policies which would have mitigated this situation. I don't buy into the fact that this is a proxy war that the Americans have been fostering or trying to make worse. Their actions at the moment, I think certain actions of some Western commentators are not helping the situation. Thinking about the Brits, Liz Truss's words over the last week or so, I think are scandalous. So I understand where Frank is coming from. I understand to a certain extent, but that doesn't absolve Putin of complete responsibility for the atrocities that are happening in Ukraine at the moment.
Neil, can you just say, I don't know if you can recall which particular words of Liz Truss you thought were scandalous?
She was essentially suggesting that she was using the word we should go in and I'm paraphrasing here, we should destroy the Russians, something to that effect. And again, I understand the sentiment, but I feel that any sort of words that are unilaterally positioning Britain as one of the belligerents is wrong. I think that any action should take place under the auspices of NATO, not of any particular country. And Liz Truss's words worried me.
Thank you very much. Who else on the panel would like to have a go at this? Aaron, okay. Aaron, what's your view of this?
Of course it's we. We are absolutely in the ball game because in 1994, I think it was, the declaration that when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, they did so on the proviso that Britain, the US and the USSR or Russia, and later France, agreed to guarantee their borders. You give them up, we'll look after you. And so the moment that all went pear-shaped, it became we straight away. But coming back to the us and them, I guess Liz, we turned into a Liz Truss question. I would say it is we, because it's we as in the rest of the world. I wouldn't like to say it's NATO against Russia, I'd say it's the world, the 141 countries that said Russia is bad in the UN. So those voiced, that wasn't a NATO thing, that was the world thing. I think it was 6 countries that backed Russia and about 8 abstained, something like that. So it's definitely a good guys, bad guys thing in that regard, I think.
Thank you, Aaron. Sergi, do you have a view of this? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. On 26th of February, I took 2 Ukrainian ladies whose families lived in Lviv which is western part of Ukraine. Reason why those ladies went to Ukraine was to bring their families back to, not back to the UK, but take them to safety to Poland first, and then to bring them to the UK. And one lady who came back, she's Ukrainian, born and bred Ukrainian, speaks Ukrainian, with me she speaks Russian, said the following things. The only reason for this war to happen was because the United States made absolutely everything to provoke Russia. It was like poking a dog with a stick, and Putin just attacked. And those words are coming from Ukrainian girl whose parents actually, well, they didn't suffer during while there was there, because Lviv was still a safe place. And there is a view which I think should be respected in many ways. What Putin, my personal view would be that till 22nd of February, 23rd of February, my picture of the view was quite clear, because lots of things were being done by the West or the United States towards Russia, which wouldn't help to create friendship or peace in the world. Actions of Putin, personally, I cannot justify, because killing people cannot be justified. But there are a couple of things which are always in my mind. And first thing, Putin's been in power for many, many years, and he's been very calculated and rational man in many ways. And the way Russia changed is quite a lot to do with the way Putin guided Russia. And for him to suddenly be, as he portrayed at the moment, a total maniac, kill of the world, Hitler, and etc., should be a big reason why this war happened. Plus, for Russians to kill Ukrainians or attack the Ukrainians is not very difficult. But you scrap any Russian and you find Ukrainian blood. You scrap any Ukrainian, you find Russian blood. We have families, like my own family, we have part of the family which lives in Russia, part which lives in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I have a friend whose brother is in Ukrainian military, and second brother is in Russian military. So effectively they're fighting each other. And so going back to one question, lots been done for this war to happen. I always think about any war or any occasion, just like Skripal's case, who is going to benefit from the event. And it's not Russia, it's not Ukraine. I'm afraid it's not going to be Europe, but United States is clearly winning in economical, political, military, you name it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergey. It's so great to have your knowledge and the fact that you are from the region. Wonderful to have your view on this. So thank you. Tama, I saw you nodding as well at a certain point. What would you like to? How would you like to respond to this?
One thing I want to say is not a war. I believe it's a genocide. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I've been working with the Syrian genocide that's been going on, and with Yemen, and we do convoys, and people say to me, it's President Assad that's killing his own people, but I'm talking to people that have left the UK and are working on the ground, and there's 5 million refugees just in Idlib, in Syria. It's the Russians that are bombing. It's Russian planes that are bombing Syria. So this has been going on. Afghanistan was bombed by Russia. If you look at, I agree with you about the United States, because coming from a Muslim background, who set up ISIS? It wasn't Muslims, it was America. You look at Chowdhury, I don't know if you know about Chowdhury, at the moment he's in prison. He was being paid by the UK government to incite terrorism in prisons, and people were coming to Islam and going to Pakistani training camps. That was nothing to do with Islam. That was the UK government paying him, and then when they got found out, he's now been put into prison. So this has been going on for a very long time. I'm seeing the suffering of the Syrian and Yemen people. Humanity first. I don't care about where you're from, what religion, what nationality you are. We're going to Ukraine. We were saying about the donations today towards we're going off to Poland, East Poland, and we're going to Ukraine in a couple of weeks' time. We were going to be going on Monday, but we were told that there was 2 British charity workers, volunteers, that have been kidnapped, so they've held us back. So we're talking to the Red Cross on the ground in the Polish refugee camps, and we're also talking to the men that have been left behind, and they need us. They need our support. They don't need our clothing. They don't need. We're sending tons of clothing that's being put aside and being left out in the rain to rot. They need medicine. They need supplies for the men that have been left behind. So we're going to Ukraine to support the men with tents, pop-up tents, sleeping bags, torches, trauma medical aid, and we're supporting the women and the children in the refugee camps. So because of I work with the Afghanistans that have come into Bournemouth, so we've got 120 individuals that have come from Afghanistan. It is 48 families, so I have coordinated all their clothing, the medicine, any baby aids, anything they've needed through the BCP Council. As a charity, we've fully funded that. We didn't get any support from the council. And again, with the Syrians conflict in 2011, we supported the people coming in from Syria. And also I'm supporting 400 men in 4 hotels in Bournemouth that are classed as illegal immigrants. And 50 of them have been taken away in the middle of the night, and they're off to Rwanda. So the whole situation, we cannot just talk about Ukraine. It's the whole, and I see personally, when I run the convoys, I'm running a convoy in the 2nd week of June, many communities are involved with our convoys. We've been doing it 6 years now. Bobby's part of that, she'll tell you. And the last convoy we ran, unfortunately, we didn't get any aid, because it was going to the Asda Castle Point, and it became a political racism row, because hang on a minute, you've got Afghan refugees stuck in hotels with nothing, you've got 400 men that have come through boats and lost loved ones. I've got a gentleman who lost 2 children on the boats. They're being told, you know, you're being sent to Rwanda, and then it's amazing, but the Ukrainian families are coming through and they're being supported. So I find the whole circle, the whole situation very sad, and I do believe the United States is to blame. They brought this all upon us.
Tana, thank you. It's fantastic to have your knowledge as well about what's going on with the refugees, so thank you very much. And I allowed you to go off a little bit off the question there, which is absolutely fine, because we want to hear what you have to say. Yeah, okay, we might have to speed up some of the answers, but to get through more questions. Let's just go back to Frank and Frank, did you want to sort of respond to anything you've heard? It sounds as though you've got a fair amount of support on the panel.
I suppose the underlying thing is that the disconnect that you have. I see a massive connection between the US belligerents as using the NATO, UK, etc. as puppets. They don't have a voice of their own. Germany going completely against any common sense view as to what they should be doing for their own economy, etc. At the behest of the US. It's that simple. They are the elite from America, not the politicians, because they're below all this. It's the ones above that are commandeering the whole issue for armaments and all that kind of stuff. And until they get some degree of world domination, they will continue. You just have to look at their 200 years of history. First of all, the American Indians, that's too far back maybe, but it's almost in their DNA. They've made policies to have an international policy to run around this world, just grabbing everything they can get. I don't want to ramble on any more than that. There's plenty more to say though.
Thank you, Frank. I'm just going to throw this open to the audience. Have we got anyone in the audience who wants to defend the US a little bit? Steve, yeah? Let me come over with the mic then, Steve.
I didn't want to defend the US. I just wondered that the people that say that the US did all of this, whether they think there's a particular, or you kind of answered it and said it's not particularly one administration, whether it's a Biden thing or a Trump thing, and when you think it's kind of part of the actual DNA of America. I just wondered if people had anything they could say on that, whether they thought it was been politically motivated by either of the recent two administrations, or whether it's something, as you say, by the security services or the CIA, etc.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments on this particular one? Barry?
What I wanted to say is that to understand is not to condone, but to understand is very important. And we're talking geopolitics here. We're talking about Russian geopolitics, which since Catherine the Great has involved controlling the lands to the south and the west of Russia, because Russia's been invaded so many times. That's the only way that they can guarantee their own security. And for its own reasons, the West has been pushing up against those boundaries. So something had to happen. Power politics have always, superpower politics, have always existed in the world. And the three major powers today are vying for power. Russia, the Americans see this as an opportunity to diminish Russia and will take that opportunity. It would be idiotic for them not to in terms of superpower politics. And that's the way of the world. So, in the slipstream of all this, we have hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of deaths and suffering. And I think the trick of politics is to play the game with a minimum of fallout, and that has failed. So what we're looking at is a failure of politics. And we shouldn't believe that superpowers and wars can be outlawed sometime. So it is a failure of politics, and the failure is, I think, in Europe and in America, but clearly also in Russia. Everyone's to blame. And the people who suffer are the people that Tana was talking about.
Thank you very much, Barry. I'm going to just move on to another question now. But the next question from a member of the audience is sort of on the similar lines. But we'll just maybe not spend quite as much time on it, but we'll just see where we go with it. So this question is from John Hart, who's here today. And John wrote this: given that Western military forces have invaded Iraq, Libya and Afghanistan, often for stated reasons that don't bear scrutiny, resulting in the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians, does the panel think there's a bit too much finger-pointing going on? Okay, so that was John's question. So maybe this is the kind of Noam Chomsky view, which is that George Bush and Tony Blair were war criminals, perhaps in the same boat as Vladimir Putin when they invaded Iraq. So in other words, how can we be complaining when we did it first? So is there an equivalence between these two things, Iraq and Ukraine? I'm going to ask Aaron if he would like to have a go at this first of all. Aaron, what do you think?
Can we call them compassion criminals instead? Can we have that if somebody is being invaded, whether it's Kuwait or Ukraine, and humanity comes to their aid, is that wrong? Would we have really, the fact that we just stood there and did nothing initially was bad in my book because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, that we had an obligation initially. NATO didn't want to go in there, that's fine. We had a coalition going without NATO into Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, take your pick. To have a NATO action has been a minimum thing. It's been always a coalition action in recent years to avoid the West-East thing. And when Russia had already invaded Chechnya and Georgia and various other places, and we sat by, and then they took Crimea with an alleged referendum, and we did nothing. When 190,000 troops crossed the border into a country that had done nothing to them, surely we can agree that's wrong, can't we?
Thank you, Aaron. Would anyone else on the panel like to pick this up? I mean, is there, I don't want to rerun the Iraq debate, but is there some kind of equivalence here going on?
Go on, Neil, you're Richard.
Okay, I mean, Aaron, you're saying, you characterise this as a black and white issue, that the Russians went into Ukraine, therefore they are in the wrong. In a very literal sense, yes, that is. But to answer the question of John, who answered, is there too much finger pointing? Yes, that there certainly is. And this is a matter of there are shades of grey here. It's not entirely a question of condemning the Russians because they went into Ukraine. Yes, on the face of it, yes, of course that is bad. But again, we need to look at the historical reasons for it happening. If the shoe was on the other foot, and if we had a dominant Soviet bloc since the Second World War who were encroaching upon the West, if they were gradually, if the Soviets were moving gradually westwards, and we were now, France was being turned into a Soviet bloc, country, we would also be very, very nervous and worried about it. So I think, again, we can understand why it's happening. That's not to condone it, but I think we need to have a bit more understanding here.
So we can point the finger both ways. One doesn't excuse the other. Sergey, did you want to pick up on this as well?
Just to add, the Cuban crisis. What would happen if Russia had missiles in Mexico? Or Canada? Chechnya was internal part of Russia. Chechnya is actually a region of Russia, so it couldn't actually invade itself, as far as I know. Georgia, as far as I know, it's a retaliation action. So Georgia is the one who started that conflict. Nothing else to add.
Okay. Thanks, Sergey.
Can I come back?
You can come back, yeah.
The missiles argument is defensive missiles. They can't shoot anything. It's not in the air approaching you. So the threat from Patriot or other SM-3 missiles, based as they are in Poland, which Russia can say, you can attack us with these. Well, you can't. You can only shoot missiles or attacking vehicles down. They are not invasive weapons. They're defensive only. And countries have the right to choose whoever. If France wanted to become part of Russia's superpower thing, if Marine Le Pen or some future person said we're going to turn into a Soviet state, that's fine. That's entirely up to them. People have the choice to be wherever they want. They can choose to be wherever they want. They can join whatever club they want, as long as it's a democratic choice.
Okay. Jeremy, your hand is sort of hovering. Do you want to say something?
I don't think I can go on for too long.
Don't go on for too long then.
I find it absolutely extraordinary that no reference so far has been made to our own complicity in the case of the war, the conflict over Ukraine. We are currently governed by arguably the most gaffe-prone Prime Minister in British history. The man is completely out of control. He's reckless, and looking at his record, to me, that is very apparent in the case of Ukraine. We're the ones who just blundered into the Ukraine before even the Americans had shown much interest, at least on the surface anyway, and sent, excuse me, can I talk please, and sent a whole thousands, millions of munitions, very destructive munitions, over to the Ukraine to defend themselves. The simple fact is that this has intensified the war in Ukraine immeasurably. It's going to prolong it immeasurably. It is going to make peace ultimately almost impossible, and that's purely because of the way we've blundered into this conflict. And so I see very little hope, frankly, as long as Boris Johnson is running the show. And I like him personally. I would buy him a drink if I ever ran into him in a bar. But as a Prime Minister, he's absolutely useless. And he has a major responsibility for the situation in the Ukraine at the moment. Okay?
Thank you very much, Jeremy. The first round of applause there for a member of the audience. I'm just going to invite John Hart to possibly, say something. John, I don't know if you want to follow up on anything you've heard in response to your question.
Yes, I just I'm hearing that the finger pointing, so to speak, seems to be all one way with the UK media. And I just wanted to wear the notion there's an amount of hypocrisy here, but I certainly don't condone Putin's special operation in any way.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to another question. Now this is a question I made up, but it's a very simple question, and maybe we can just have some fairly short answers on this one. Has the Third World War started? Are we in the beginnings of the Third World War? That sort of idea has been bandied about a little bit already. So, would anyone on the panel like to sort of pick this up? Yes or no, and maybe reasons why? Tara.
I think the Second World War's never ended. To be honest, there's been conflict since the Second World War. You look at 50 million displaced people in the world. It's the highest ever. So I just think this is heightened. I don't think it's going to be a Third World War because, as you said with Boris Johnson, I don't think he's going to last much longer, hopefully. And we might have somebody intelligent come in. But, with war, it should be a public vote. We've stood behind and watched Boris Johnson again give millions of pounds to Ukraine when we've got the suffering that we've got here today in our own country, running the charity that I run, seeing people this morning putting bread on radiators to make toast for their children because they can't afford. Seeing a 75-year-old man this morning putting eggs into his kettle because he couldn't afford to make breakfast. He couldn't afford to boil water and boil water for a cuppa. So we're giving money again, and I think it's because we've been told, when you say that UK's gone in before America, because we've been told to do so. Again, with the Iraqi war, it's the same.
Thanks, Tom. That's a really interesting observation or interpretation that the Second World War hasn't actually ended and we're still in the Second World War. Okay. Neil, are we in the Third World War?
No. I think that when the history of the Ukraine conflict is written, it will be seen as a bit of a footnote to the real issues that are going on in the world. The major Third World War that will happen will be fought on environmental front, on economic fronts, and so forth. And yes, this is desperately sad that so many people are losing their lives, and a geopolitical conflict is being played out on our screens and radios. But ultimately, this will all finish within a relatively short time. I'm talking about, over the long term. But then the major problems are going to kick in. So the Third World War will be fought on environmental and economic fronts.
So Neil, you're anticipating the Third World War, but this current conflict is going to be a footnote. I thought that was very interesting. Okay. Does anyone else? Yeah, Sergi, and then Aaron. Yeah, what's your view on this? Third World War or not?
I think it is, and I think not just the military action, where we're already facing demonizing Russians on all fronts. Culturally, historically, politically, economically, you just name it. It's the worst nation on earth now, all portrayed in the media.
Did you say demonizing?
Demonizing, yes, totally demonizing. Knowing that tennis players cannot take part in the tournaments. Tchaikovsky was not played on Classic FM for more than a month. It's only recently appeared again. So is Rachmaninoff and etc. Dostoevsky not being taught anymore. Russians being hunted in Europe, not sensibly, not happening that much in the UK. And that's just what we are facing.
Thank you, Sergey. Aaron?
No, I don't think it's a Third World War. That potential existed about a month ago, but then Russians' ability to fight a war has been shown to be abysmal, luckily. They will run out of all sorts of munitions before Ukraine will, because Ukraine will have the West backing it, thanks to Boris and illustrious Prime Minister, who stepped in without being told by the US or NATO or anybody else, thought this is the right thing to do, we agreed to back them and we're going to do it. And Russia has been portrayed as the worst country in the world, possibly worse than North Korea and various others. Putin is, as long as he's in charge, they will suffer immensely, and that will go on. But I don't think, I agree with Neil, it'll be a short-fought war. I think they'll run out of steam by August, and it'll be over by August in the main, and then there'll be some negotiation, possibly, and hopefully Ukraine will get everything back that they've lost.
You heard it here first of all, it'll be over by August, okay. Tammy, you want to come back?
Can I just make a point on that? I don't think it'll be over, because you've got to remember, as I said to you in the beginning, that Russia is bombing Syria for the last 11 years. So they've had the power to do that. There's a lot of power behind them we don't know. So I don't think it's going to end with Ukraine. And it didn't start with Ukraine.
And we need to, of course, also to recall that this war has been going on for 8 years already. It was only an escalation. Jeremy, I could see. And Daniel. Jeremy, did you want to just quickly?
I'll go to Daniel.
Okay, let's go to Daniel.
Turn my volume up. I'll take it away from the machine. What line would have to be crossed before it becomes a real risk that this conflict could spill over into wider Europe or even become a nuclear conflict?
Would anyone like to pick that up? Neil?
Well, I think the answer is in your question. I think if the nuclear issue cropped up, that would be the tipping point. Even if there was a benign nuclear weapon that was used, as the Russians put it, dropping it in the sea or in some isolated area, I think that is what the Americans and NATO would see as the absolute red line.
And what do you think would happen at that point, Neil?
I think the Americans would basically completely eviscerate the Russian forces, cyber attacks would destroy the Russian economy, and I think the repercussions would be so dreadful that Putin, however, strange as thinking might be, I don't think he would really countenance that.
So you're saying, Neil, that the United States has got the power now to completely defeat Russia within days?
Absolutely. I mean, potentially, and in reality, I mean, there are hawks in the American administration who I'm sure are just rubbing their hands, hoping that this happens, so that they can leap in and send the bombs in. I mean, I sincerely hope it doesn't happen. Obviously, I think we all do, but I think that is the red line. I think the idea that Russian forces they talk about 1 foot into NATO countries and that will be it. I don't really think that will be it, but I think the nuclear bomb would be it. And I think that would make it into a Third World War. It wouldn't even be a war, because it would all be over within a matter of days.
But sorry, just to be clear, you think that Russia would be the massive loser rather than the West, should we say?
Well, the whole world will be losers, because if this was to happen, it would fundamentally it would be the biggest thing to happen in anybody's lifetime if that were to happen. But I don't think it will happen, because I think that Putin is too aware of the repercussions.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy.
I think we're all grossly underestimating the Russians, their resilience, their capacity to pick themselves up. Excuse me. Hitler made that mistake in the late 1930s, early 1940s, to his terrible cost. The Russians turned out to be very much tougher than he expected, and ultimately played the major role in World War II in defeating Nazi Germany. I would just like to make one final point. I don't think anybody has mentioned the fact that at the moment, thanks to our wonderful Prime Minister, we are public enemy #1 in Russia. We are top of the list when it comes to any military conflict. The 6,000 thermonuclear warheads they have, trust me, are going to be sent over in our direction if any world war begins in the not too distant future. And that, as I said, is all due to the idiocy of our present Prime Minister. Thank you.
Sorry, has that been turned off?
Yeah, sorry, it's accidentally turned off.
We can still hear you.
That's okay, not to worry. Aaron, did you want to come back on this?
Yeah, the reason, one of the reasons Russia isn't winning at the moment is it's holding everything back because of us. If anything happened with NATO, they've left all their main key armed forces to defend Moscow and the borders. So you're not seeing thousands of fighter planes going over Ukraine. It's 2 here and 1 there and 3. They're not sending entire squadrons. They're holding everything back because if they stepped into NATO, they know they wouldn't be able to stop us. And if we did nothing and these 5,000 nuclear warheads were coming over here and obliterated the UK, nothing in the northern hemisphere would grow a potato for the next 30 years, including Russia. We wouldn't have to fire a shot. They would be dead as us. So the moment we don't have to fire anything. They would kill themselves in their own thing. So I think that is the security there.
Frank.
Thank you, because my memory is not very good. Basically, in answer to this idea of Russia not doing so well in Ukraine, it's my view that Russia has gone in there not in a warlike fashion as much as to try and get to a situation where Ukraine will, after this conflict, be a friend and to have business backwards and forwards, as was requested, if you like, by Russia, that Ukraine should stay in the middle so it can deal with both sides of this political debate. So, as opposed to the way that UK and America went into Iraq and just bombed it into 1,000 years back into its history, I think that the approach of Russia is to move in there, get control of what they need to get control of, search out the people that have been bombing Donbass and sort them out by way of criminal courts, and disturb with as little upheaval as is possible.
Thank you, Frank. I'm going to move on now to... okay, Sergi, yeah, do. Okay.
First 2 weeks of this conflict, war, name it, most of our Russian friends were in disarray because it was beyond belief that Russia was fighting Ukraine. Then the reaction of the West with, as I said, demonizing Russians, that put most of the Russians behind Putin and they would support him till the end. And Russian life is, when there is a motherland involved, it doesn't matter. As part of me is Russian, we do anything for the country, motherland, and material stuff like homes, cars, and etc. wouldn't make any difference. And I'm afraid more weapons and etc. being sent to Ukraine, it's only prolonging the war, it's not winning the war. And I think West has openly said that all this help goes to Ukraine not because the West wants for Ukraine to win, it's because they want to weaken Russia, and it has been openly, I think, states. Don't remember the name of the minister who pronounced it, but that's the reason why Ukrainians and Russians are killing each other. It's to weaken Russia so as another state to make stronger. And another bit, we tend to always underestimate Russia, just like Russia always overestimates its own capabilities. And yes, if you take a view that the reason for the war for Russia to take over Ukraine, then yes, Russia is not doing well. you take a view that Russia is doing as less damage to infrastructure and civilians than it does what it intended to do. Thank you very much.
Sergi, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to you, if I may. You said that Western armaments going into Ukraine is prolonging the war, and obviously there's an element of truth in that, or maybe that is totally true. Given your ethnicity and your background and your identity and all the rest of it, do you think that the best outcome is that for this situation is for Ukraine to become a kind of satellite state, perhaps like Belarus? Is that what you think the best outcome would be? And what do you think about our view of Ukraine is that they want to be a free, democratic, independent, Western-style nation. Is that wrong? Do you think it would be better if they became a kind of satellite of Russia? Is that what you would like to see?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I'd like for peace to return on any conditions. This war just needs to stop on any conditions. When we send weapons to Ukraine and etc., and we talk about, so Russians needs to be pushed back and territories to return to Ukraine, including Crimea, that means this war will never stop. I wouldn't want Ukraine to become a vassal state of Russia. For Ukraine is Ukraine, can do whatever it wants. But I think the wish of Russia to have guarantees what Russia has been asking in December and January, or to have a guarantee that it will be left in peace and it will have a bumper states between the West or NATO states and Russia. I think it's a legitimate wish. Thank you.
So, okay, so you think that Russia should be able to keep...
So economically Ukraine, or politically, or etc., Ukraine can do like any other states, can do whatever they want, but just don't be a part of a military alliance which is on the border of Russia.
Okay, so and what about the status of Donbass and Crimea? Should they stay within the Russian orbit?
Okay. So why don't we ask people of the Crimea or Crimeans?
Sure. Okay. Okay. That's.
And I think actually we tend to think that referendum, which happened in 2014, that was rigged, and 87% of Crimeans didn't vote. That's what we tend to believe. However, coming from Crimea and lived in the Crimea, it was true. 87% would want to be part of Russia because of many reasons. So if you want, I'll elaborate, but it is what it is. So the same with Donbass.
Okay.
Need to speak.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, you can applaud it. I did see Barry's hand go up, and a hand here as well. Barry, do you still want to come in?
I was going to widen it out into more geopolitics and perspective, but just have one more thing to say.
Okay.
It's not quite on your subject. Yes, just to... Is it on? It is on. Just to widen out the perspective into a sort of global geopolitical perspective, to try and see the war in Ukraine through a slightly different direction. The two major powers in the world today are China and America. Russia's a sideshow in terms of the size of its economy and its global reach. The Americans would... touch the button. It is very much in the Americans' interest to demonstrate to the Chinese what the consequences would be to try and take Taiwan. Very much so. You will notice that the Americans have not got very excited by the Chinese conquering and subjugating a buffer zone called Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs live. And that's been a problem for them for probably 1,000 years. No great upset there, but it is very much in America's interest to demonstrate to the Chinese what would happen if they tried to expand their territory into areas that America regards as its backdoor, like Taiwan. So there are games within games here that it's useful to be aware of.
Thank you very much, Karen. Try to keep this turned on. Yes, what would your point?
Well, I thought I'd like to raise the word appeasement, which has not come into this discussion at all. And if you just let Putin roll in, isn't that appeasement? And also,
You just try to hold it at the top there.
and if you do let Putin roll ahead and do what he wants, then you're going to get a further roll-on of him going into Moldova, into other countries, and at least leading the way with that, because he wants to leave a legacy of him as the great conqueror, regaining the lands he used to have. And I don't think we should forget that Ukraine was never always in the Russian Federation. It was under, I think, possibly the Duchy of Lithuania, or it might be Latvia, I've just forgotten. So they cannot claim it was always part of the Russian Federation as one of their excuses. And I'd also like to add at the same time that some of you obviously dislike that Boris Johnson has actually acted swiftly here and given the people of Ukraine a chance to defend themselves and the democracy they obviously want. And, well, I'm not going to go, that will cover it.
So maybe this is running out of juice.
We're not as flashing, David, as the battery.
Maybe we need a new battery. Okay. We'll keep going as long as we can. We have Dan, if you can look at some new batteries. Yes, thank you. Would you like to see then a complete defeat for
David, would you like to use one of those other microphones? If you give that to me, I'll have.
Thank you.
Do you know where the other batteries are?
They're in the bank somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, just as a follow-up from what you were saying, would you like to see a complete defeat then for Putin in this situation?
Well, he's not helping himself at all, because the immediate reaction has been that Finland and Sweden are going to join NATO. NATO, as we are sitting here, are all, I bet, scurrying around and strengthening their defences, because they know that dictators cannot be appeased. And of course, there's going to be terrible destruction in Ukraine. I feel sorry for that. I do worry about this proxy war business. But we've learned in the past we must stand up to dictators, and Britain knows that with our history more than most.
David, can I?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, to answer that appeasement question, I think that there's a real danger in equating ceding territory with accepting defeat, but I don't accept that. I think that if you look at Poland, for example, Poland over the centuries has gradually been diminished in size, and yet it is now a very strong, very culturally strong country, and I see no reason why Ukraine can't go that way. I might be anticipating a question that David's got coming up, but I'll jump the gun here. If we think about outcomes, yes, I think all of us want to see, in an ideal world, to see the Russians defeated, that we don't reward aggression. Absolutely, but we're thinking about where we are. There are only three possible outcomes. Either Russia's going to win, the Ukrainians are going to win, or there's going to be some sort of rumbling on war. And I just can't see the Ukrainians winning at the moment. I know they seem to be on the up. I don't think it's acceptable to see the Russians to be seen to completely win. But for me, the preferable solution would be to have some sort of negotiated settlement whereby the Russians do hang on to possibly Crimea. I'm sorry, Sergio, I know you don't like what I'm going to say. If they hang on to Donbass and Luhansk, and there are some sort of absolutely binding agreements with the West that agree that the Russians won't go any further. And again, as I said, we've got the Polish precedent here.
Aaron is dying to come back. Aaron, go ahead.
The binding agreements like the 1994 memorandum that they've already obliterated. The West supplying the weapons to Ukraine is keeping them going. If we stop supplying the weapons, as was mentioned earlier, Russia will just make inroads and just take the entire country and shoot everybody, civilian, whoever it is, in their way to stop them. And we've seen that, we know it's going to happen, and Kyiv will fall. And we can't allow that to happen. We will supply them weapons until they get to succeed. If Ukraine ever looked like they are losing, we would have to go in there. The world, as a UN organisation or something, maybe NATO, would have to go in and push Russia out. We could not allow Ukraine to fall under any circumstances.
I'd like to move on to some... okay, Maureen, let's get to you. Pardon? Oh, you want to ask a question? Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
Excuse my ignorance, but my impression has been that Russia has been waiting patiently for the Minsk agreement to be sorted, and within that, the Donbass region to be sorted. Can panel members help me with this?
Who's an expert on Minsk? Sergei, can you give us some help on that?
Thank you very much. And from my point of view, you're absolutely right. And 2 Ukrainian presidents signed those agreements. And what happened? There is a political part of Minsk agreement, which was the next step of the Minsk agreement was to go to Ukrainian parliament. Did this ever happen? What about other steps? The only reason why Minsk agreement never gone ahead was because that was an instrument to impose sanctions over Russia, which somehow, well, arguably, but sanctions were linked to Minsk agreement to be successful. So there are two aspects. What I've seen. Ukrainian government or Ukrainian presidents never acted on their own behalf or on behalf of Ukrainian people. They were used as an instrument to impose sanctions on Russia or weaken Russia. All those years, Russia insisted again and again and again on Minsk Concord to happen, for legal part to be implemented into Ukrainian law. Instead, previous parliament implemented an intention of Ukraine to become part of European Union and NATO, which is a direct threat to Russia. It's on the border of Russia, and we said again and again, it's a red line for Russian Federation. Don't know what to add.
Okay, thank you, Sergei. Aaron, you wanted to add something on this?
I'm not knowledgeable on the agreement itself, but I am aware of the ethnicity in the Ukraine area, whereas Crimea was, I believe, 84% Russian-speaking, Russian nationality, and so when Russia went in there and did their referendum, it got support. In the Donbass and those regions right on the far border of Russia, the Russian areas are about 46%. They're not a majority, which is probably why Kyiv and the other areas are just not going to hand them over. That's like, for example, in Bournemouth, 3,000 people saying we don't want a wind farm off the coast, so we'll just say we don't want to do that, where 300,000 people didn't get a say. So just because a small minority voice of the separatists there are making a fuss and fighting their own people there, it doesn't make it the right thing.
Minsk agreements were about implementing Minsk agreement would ensure that that part of Donbass region would become or would be reintegrated into Ukraine. There was nothing to do with that Donbass to become part of Russia. original Minsk agreements were all to do with that part, with special, governed by additional laws by being part of Ukraine. So why Ukraine wouldn't implement and actually go ahead?
Jeremy, can you give us a little bit more information about Minsk?
Yeah, I can't say, but I just want to make a comment. Yes, could somebody explain briefly what's in that agreement?
Yeah, I mean that would be, well, yeah. There are two parts to it, aren't there? With Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. I don't know that I want to give you that as your homework actually to go away and do that, rather than us get into a lecture on Minsk. Jeremy, just briefly then, and then I want to move on.
Yes, sorry. All I wanted to say was to emphatically reject the notion that we have any vital interest or interests whatsoever in the Ukraine. It is none of our darn business, excuse my language, to have got involved in that conflict to begin with. We've exacerbated an internecine conflict which the vast majority of us know nothing about or understand. And it is insane of us to keep on supplying munitions to the Ukraine, which will only perpetuate and continue and prolong this crazy conflict, which is absolutely none of our business.
That's what James said about Czechoslovakia. It wasn't, isn't it? It wasn't any of our business, it was too far away.
And he was right.
So I say, slaughtering Jews, and we would do nothing. Is that what you think?
I certainly do. Sorry.
Okay, we're not going to get into debating the rights and wrongs of the Second World War today, but maybe another time. Daniel.
My personal view about supply to Ukraine is that if the Ukrainian people believe that it's not in their best interest to receive those weapons, then they're welcome to refuse them, but at the moment they are accepting them. As for Aaron's earlier comment that if Ukraine starts to seriously lose the battle, then we should actually send in forces and engage with Russia ourselves, I completely disagree with that. I think it would only lead to many more people dying.
Thank you. I am going to move this. I just want to move on to a slightly different question now, as we're running a little bit short of time, and we've got loads of questions to go. We won't get through all of them. What I would really like to ask the panel is this, and I think I might start with you, Tama, if that's okay. Where do you get most of your information from, and do you trust your sources? And the reason I've come back to you, Tama, is because right at the beginning you made a couple of claims which I thought were very surprising, something along the lines of, well, ISIS is the creation of the United States, and then Chowdhury is the fault of the UK government. I'd just like to know, where do you get your information from? Do you trust your sources? Okay, if you could use the mic, Tara. Thanks.
All my sources are from the people themselves. Being in the community for over 30 years, speaking to people that have gone out to Syria, and I'm speaking to them daily, and I'm hearing from the people that are suffering daily. Working with individuals that have been, are suffering. I can remember being in the mosque 20 odd years ago. I mean, I've been a Muslim 35 years now, and I can remember the whole thing of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and America was celebrating them at the time. They were celebrating the leaders. They were funding them. I can remember, obviously we can all remember 9/11. 9/11 was hijacked by America. It wasn't the Muslim people that wanted that. So we've got to, when we're talking about... Sorry? What do you mean? It was America itself that actually trained the pilots. It's been proven. So what I'm saying is like... Sorry?
Okay. Let's hear what Tama has to say, and if there's a little bit of pushback, but I don't want to get into 9/11 right now.
I'm saying that religion is hijacked, and countries, and that will hijack for a reason. There's always a reason behind that. So when I'm looking at Syria example, I know the UK government is backing what's happening in Syria. I know that myself because of any funding that I do. I'm closed down. My bank accounts are closed down. If I want to support, and the thing is, in these camps, they're not just Syrians. There's Iraqis that have been killed and tortured and they've had to come over to Syria. They're not all Muslims. We've got Jewish community, Christian community. I don't work just for the Muslims. So I know for a fact that any work I do, the English government will fight against me.
Okay. Tamara, clearly you were getting a little bit of pushback on some of the claims you were making there, but I don't think we've got time to go into counterclaims there. But thank you for letting us know where you get most of your information from. It sounds as though it's mostly from people on the ground. And that
it's people that have left the UK to do projects in these countries.
Okay.
They're English-born people. They're not necessarily Muslim. We've got Christians, we've got Jews, we've got non-faith people that have gone out to do projects. As soon as they go out, we've done the New Baby Born project in 2011. I know a lady from London that went over. She had her passport taken away and she's still there. She's now in the refuge herself.
Thank you. I'm going to let you pass the mic to Aaron to ask Aaron the same question. Aaron, where do you get your information from and do you trust your sources?
It's mainly you, isn't it?
What, on Twitter?
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot of people don't like the BBC, but the BBC is my first port of call for the average run-of-the-mill news, and then when things come up, I'd like to look into it a bit deeper.
How do you look into it more deeply?
Well, in the current issue with Ukraine, I'm following fighters who are in Ukraine, who are having videos of their own actions. I'm following people who are doing collating information from drone imagery, and also with
how do you know this is not all deep fake stuff going on?
It's well, my faith in that is because it's coming from a variety of different sources. So we've had media from different European countries, Austria, France, and Germany, who've got their representatives in the various parts who are doing different reports, and they all feed back to various Sky News or BBC or other places. So because there's a variety of different trusted nations, should we say, who are giving us this information, then you get an overall picture. If it were all coming from the UK or US or a single source, then obviously you're not getting a full picture.
Okay, so multiple sources. With just one more quick follow-up question. Would you be able to spot a deep fake if you saw one?
No. I think I wouldn't. It might not be very apparent. If somebody said that's a bit dodgy, I'd look into it, but on first I could be fooled.
Okay, thank you. Can we go to you, Sergi? Where do you get your information from, and do you trust your sources?
So I do follow British media. Russian media was mostly blocked in the UK, cannot get access, and Ukrainian media. Plus I get information from people who are actually in the Ukraine, who face real situation, or sitting in the basement, or are now on the front line, and trying to combine those together. But I'll just give you one example of the war in Georgia, when the same picture was portrayed by 3 different sources, British, Russian and Ukrainian. The same picture from the same man, and it had 3 different explanations.
And a quick follow-up question for you, Sergi. Do you think it's wrong that Russian media is blocked in this country at the moment?
Yes, naturally.
Okay.
Yes, naturally.
Okay. I can see some hands going up, which I'll get to you. I'm just going to ask Neil to answer this question.
Sorry. BBC is the same propaganda media tool as Russian or RT or Russia Today. It's this case in Bucha, as we all heard about. Actually, BBC is the one who proved in many ways that it was, in many ways, was not a fake but staged. And a reason why was because BBC showed pictures which were produced by the Times, I think New York Times, showing the same bodies laying on the same street for 3 weeks. And for me, the moment I say I'm not forensic, but my wife is, it shouted, it's stage. And BBC would never investigate facts like this. And BBC always showed just one single line, never show a second picture. I'm just back from Greece, less than a week ago. So in Glasgow State we had British Sky One, BBC Worldwide, and Greek channels. And for some reasons, Greeks would show actually media reports from another side, from Donetsk Republic, from Lugansk Republic, and would leave people to make own mind.
Thank you, Sergi. Neil, briefly, and then I've got some hands going up I'd like to get to.
Very briefly, I get my information from the mainstream media on the whole, Western media, not just this country, but I'm lucky enough to speak French and Spanish fluently, so I follow the French and Spanish media. Very similar stories are coming out. I am very wary of taking hard facts at face values, particularly in terms of casualty numbers and so on. As far as RT, I think that was a real mistake, banning RT.
Thank you. Let's go to Steve.
Yeah, I'm someone who's sort of changing their mind a little bit. Before this started, before the Russians invaded, my view was taken very much from my knowledge of Russia from when I was in the British-Soviet Friendship Society in the 1980s. And I visited Russia then, and I was aware that Ukraine was the breadbasket, as I understood it, of Russia, that Russia needed Ukraine for its agricultural supplies. And I was told also that in 2015, the United Nations put forward a resolution trying to make the glorification of Nazis illegal, or something along those lines. And that vast majority of the nations that voted, I think it was, these figures may be out, about 120 nations voted to make the glorification of Nazis illegal, 40 odd abstained, and 2 voted against, United States and Ukraine. Now, I don't know whether that is propaganda. I've come across it through people giving me stuff on the internet. So I was quite sympathetic to Russia and felt, why on earth can't Ukraine adhere to the Minsk agreements and remain a neutral country? I thought, Putin is not going to be alive for very much longer. 10 years, 20 years. He won't be in power forever. Young generations are coming along who are going to see change. And then, suddenly, as the US intelligence had said, these Russian maneuvers did turn into an invasion. And it seems to me that the very thing that Putin didn't want, which was everybody joining NATO, is now achieved. And as Sergei said, Putin has always been very, very rational. Yet it seems now he's lost his strategic thinking because it seems to have backfired. And the bombing of eastern Ukraine and Mariupol, maybe we're seeing it only through our Western media propaganda, but it does seem to me to be barbaric. And I get the impression that even the Russian speakers now in Ukraine are sort of siding on the Ukrainian side. I don't know whether Sergei detects a change in view of Ukrainian, Russian ethnic speakers. So I'm quite confused. I think that the West could have avoided this war. It was a failure of politics. But now that it's got to where it is, and knowing that Putin seems to be, he was brought up within the Soviet era, he's part of a geopolitical era in which he wants a greater Russia. Under communism, there was an ideological motive to save the world from the evils of capitalism, to expand. But with the collapse of communism, that ideological conflict ended, and we're back to the previous century when it's just capitalist powers grubbing around for extra resources. One thing I've heard that was very interesting today was the fact that maybe this is to stop China attacking Taiwan. I thought that put new light on it. So I'm confused.
Thank you very much, Steve, for those insights. Roger, did you have your hand up?
It was more of a question, really. We've talked a lot about Putin and the Russians, but isn't it time we've made a separation between the political powers and the people? And this is really for the whole world, really. Do the political powers, the politicians have too much power? Maybe more accurately, the private financial funds that are increasingly questioning and controlling our governments.
Thank you, Roger. That is opening up another big question, and we're running out of time. I'm just going to take a few more comments from the floor, and then we're going to start wrapping up so that we can get some cake and coffee. But David, as I'm over this side.
Thank you. I just comment that surely what triggered the idea of in Putin's mind was the shambles of us leaving Afghanistan. I mean, that was a complete disaster for all the Western nations, and still is.
Thank you, David. Let's come to Roger. And then I will come to you as well.
There's at least a dozen things I could say. I'll just make two very quick points.
Thank you.
And one slightly longer one. The two quick points. One is that if perhaps we had reacted more forcibly when Russia annexed Crimea, that might have given further pause for thought in Russia. I forgot what the second one was, which was probably a good idea. The third point was that in fact I don't think it is true that we have blocked RT, or what was now called Russia Today. I listened to Russia Today, not in the last week or so, but certainly within the last 10 days, and it is still perfectly possible to receive it by going on your computer and looking at the feeds there. It has in fact been blocked by the European Union because the French was the organisation that streamed it into Britain through Sky and so forth, and it is that has been blocked, not by the British government.
So the website is blocked right now. I'm trying to access it and you can't access it.
Okay,
so.
Dan can't access it right now. Okay, but thank you, Roger, for those points. Yes, briefly, please.
So, I think people here find it hard to understand that there's what I found it hard to understand the different mindsets that we're looking at. It's a fantastic story, forgive me for the history. When Winston Churchill went home in July 1945 and Clement Attlee came back as Prime Minister, Comrade Stalin, by the way, killed 10 million Ukrainians because of his agricultural policy, literally really couldn't understand how Churchill, A, would allow there to be election, and B, that he wouldn't count votes. Stalin said, I don't mind who votes, but the key thing is who counts them. And I think in the liberal, democratic, bourgeois West, where we are now, we find it impossible to understand that we are dealing with a totalitarian society. And there are no easy answers. I would completely reject the idea of conspiracy theory. We really don't know the answers.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, we're really on 3:30 now, we need to wrap up. Let's have one more question for the panel that's going to, Kathy, if you've been waiting. Okay, very quickly then.
I can never make this work, it's working.
Yeah.
What no one has mentioned so far is our attitude to the switch over from communism to capitalism in Russia, and how the West, as far as I see it, I'm not an economist, I'm very aware of economists here, that by our way we've treated the money, and we've allowed people to come and spend their money in the West, we've actually gained mightily from that, I presume, and our wealth in England at the moment. And the fact that a lot of folks, I think it was 2017, 2018, wanted to be a register of property owners, the Russians. He was actually stood on by May thing. I'm not sure about what happened after that. But I feel quite strongly that we've contributed to Putin being able to be the dictator he is.
Thank you very much, Kathy. We could open that one up. But I'm going to try once more to try and wrap this up. Okay, my final question for the panel, and panel members, I would ask you to give a fairly brief answer to this, if you would. And then I'm going to ask Tama to finish up with a little bit more information about why we should give generously to the work that she's doing for refugees and as a bollocks back for that purpose. So, panel members, how's it going to end? How's it going to end? Is Russia going to win? Is Ukraine going to win? Is there going to be a messy compromise? Maybe those are the three main choices. Neil?
I predict that there will be a negotiated settlement of some kind. How it'll look, I don't know.
Thank you. Very brief. Thank you very much. So
hope the same.
You hope for the same. Okay. Thank you. Aaron?
I think Russia will be pushed out of the eastern borders, and I think Crimea will be a bit of a battle and will probably stay as it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Tama? The same. Okay. Tama, then, could I ask you just to briefly just give you a little sales pitch in a way as to why the people here today should give generously to the work that you're doing?
So I've been running convoys for 6 years for Syria and Yemen, and I have a charity in BCP area called BCP Shout Out, and we are working with the Reformed Church in Commercial Road, where we run the convoys from, and we have a team of 1 from each community. We have 4 team members that will be taking our long wheeled van, and I am working with the Red Cross in the camps, in the Polish camps, and they've listed me what they need. So there is essential foods, and there is medical aid, and as I said, tents and sleeping bags for the men that have stayed behind. So we are aiming now to do the convoy, and the collection will be the first week of August now. We've had to change our dates. And everybody's welcome to come in and drop and we will give a list out, so I'll give it out to you, David, and you can share it.
So if people give money today, can you use that?
So the money that will be given today will be to purchase the pop-up tents, the sleeping bags and torches for the men that have stayed behind and they're fighting.
Thank you.
We will do the food that we're looking to purchase.
Thank you. Okay. So if people would like to give generously to Tama's appeal, that would be great. The bowl by the door. If you would rather give to our annual appeal, and I'm not saying this by way of competition, but just to let you know that the Dorset Humanist Committee has made a decision that we will continue with our annual appeal for the Hope for Food Bank locally, which is obviously addressing different issues, particularly with the cost of living crisis at the moment. So just to let you know that there's that opportunity as well, but I'd encourage you to give generously today to Tama's charity. Okay, it just remains to me, sorry Jeremy, I'm going to wrap things up. It just remains to me to say thank you all for coming. I mean, it's been a fantastic birthday treat for me to be in the sort of David Dimbleby. I've done my best to do a sort of David Dimbleby, so I hope I haven't done too badly. But will you please give a big round of applause to our panel members. Oh dear, Lynn wants to say something.
Okay, well that wasn't the most cheery of subjects to have just before a birthday party, but of course we all know that it is our esteemed chairman's birthday today, so I think we should all join in singing happy birthday to him, don't you? Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear David, happy birthday to you.
I wasn't expecting that, but thank you. That was all marvellously in tune. Who's that for? Oh, that's for me. What about the panel? All right, we've got things for the panel as well. Yeah, thanks for coming, and please do stay for coffee and cake. The cake will be cut into very small pieces now. There's coffee as well in the cafe.